Deputy Marcus Flynn sat alone in his patrol car, the cold night air seeping through the cracked window as a faint mist curled round the edges of the forest. He rubbed his hands together, trying to stave off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The reports from the past weeks weighed heavily on his mind. The disappearances, the strange noises, the whispered rumors that he'd done his best to dismiss. But tonight, something gnawed at the edges of his certainty. Earlier that evening, he had reluctantly agreed to accompany Eleanor Nell Hayes on a patrol near the forest's edge. Nell, with her sharp eyes and relentless questions, had pressed him to revisit sites of recent disappearances. Marcus had been skeptical. He'd seen his share of panicked townsfolk spinning tales, but something about Nell's determination was infectious, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. The forest was a different creature at dusk. Shadows lengthened into grotesque shapes, and the usual sounds of night seemed muted or distorted. As they moved along a narrow dirt path, Marcus's instincts screamed at him to stay close to the firelight of the town. But Nell's probing gaze and keen mind pulled him deeper into the unknown. Suddenly, a movement caught his eye, flicker of darkness darting between the trees. He stopped, heart pounding, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the light or a restless animal. But the shape was too deliberate, too fluid. It moved against the natural rhythm of the forest, slipping between branches with an unnatural grace. "Did you see that?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Nell's eyes narrowed. "I did. Something's out here with us." Marcus swallowed hard, the old certainty crumbling. He wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to nerves or exhaustion. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Back in the sheriff's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Marcus sifted through reports, the pages blurring as his mind replayed the night's encounter. Nell was there too, leaning over the desk, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "You can't keep ignoring what's happening," she said quietly. "There's something in the pines, Marcus, something real." He bristled at the accusation. "I'm charged with keeping this town safe, not chasing ghost stories." "But what if the ghosts are real?" The room fell silent, only the hum of the fluorescent light overhead filling the space. Marcus's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe in logic, in reason, but the evidence was mounting against him. That night, alone in his patrol car, the forest pressed close. Whispers seemed to drift on the wind, unintelligible but unmistakable. Marcus's breath fogged the windshield as he scanned the darkness. Then, in the periphery of his vision, two glowing eyes reflected the moonlight from the woods. He blinked, and they vanished. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, heart hammering. The line between reality and something else blurred. The next morning, outside the local diner, Marcus found himself walking alongside Nell in the crisp dawn air. Neither spoke for a long moment, the weight of their shared experience hanging between them. "I don't know what I believe anymore," Marcus admitted, voice low. Nell glanced at him, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "Maybe belief isn't the point. Maybe it's about facing what's out there anyway." Marcus nodded slowly, the first cracks of trust forming. Together, they would have to confront the darkness creeping through the Pine Barrens, whether it was myth, madness, or something far worse. As the sun rose behind the dense trees, the forest seemed to watch them silently, its shadows thick and unyielding. The battle for the truth had only just begun, and Marcus knew there was no turning back. The night still whispered secrets, and the forest waited. The forest around them seemed to close in as Nell followed Mabel deeper into the Pine Barrens, the dense canopy blotting out much of the afternoon light and casting long, shifting shadows over the gnarled roots that twisted like ancient serpents across the forest floor. Every footfall was muffled by a thick carpet of fallen pine needles and damp earth. The scent of moss and decay hanging heavy in the air, thick with the weight of centuries. Mabel moved with a quiet certainty, her thin frame weaving effortlessly through the underbrush, her silver hair catching the dim light like strands of moonlight caught on a spider's web. Nell struggled to keep pace, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This was territory far beyond the ordinary, far beyond the realm of mere folklore and local legend. After what felt like an eternity winding through the tangled forest, they stepped into a clearing so sudden and stark it felt like crossing an invisible threshold. At its center stood a stone altar, ancient and covered in thick moss. Its surface cracked and time-worn, but still bearing the unmistakable marks of ritual. Nell's eyes traced the intricate carvings etched deep into the stone-twisting vines. Arcane symbols and strange figures that seemed part animal, part shadow. The designs pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow, as if the very essence of the forest whispered secrets to those who would listen. Mabel's voice broke the silence, low and reverent. "This place," she said, "was once the heart of a sacred binding. The old ones knew the darkness lurking beneath these pines. They carved their prayers and warnings here to keep it chained." Nell reached out tentatively, fingertips brushing the cold stone, feeling the rough texture beneath her skin and the subtle hum that seemed to resonate from the ancient symbols. The air grew heavier, charged with a tension that raised the hairs on her arms. "What exactly were they binding?" Nell asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mabel's piercing eyes met hers, shadowed with the weight of knowledge and fear. Not the Jersey devil, child. Something older, something primal. The primordial shade. As if summoned by the name, a sudden breeze stirred the leaves overhead, carrying with it faint whispers that seemed to echo from the very earth itself. Nell's breath caught as she scanned the perimeter, half expecting to see some dark shape lurking just beyond the tree line. They moved closer to a set of ancient trees surrounding the clearing, their bark carved with cryptic symbols and runes. Nell knelt to examine the markings, delicate yet haunting patterns that spoke of rites long forgotten. The carvings told of sacrifices, protections, and warnings against stirring the darkness beneath. Mabel placed a trembling hand on one tree, beginning a chant in a language Nell couldn't understand, the words twisting and curling through the air like smoke. The forest seemed to respond. The shadows deepened, and the faint glow around the carvings intensified. Nell felt a pulse beneath her fingertips, as if the very heart of the forest throbbed with ancient power. The boundary between past and present, myth and reality, blurred into a single moment of chilling clarity. Suddenly, a rustle in the underbrush snapped Nell's attention back to the present. Her eyes darted toward the movement, heart pounding fiercely, but only a small squirrel scurried away, disappearing among the fallen leaves. "You feel it too," Mabel said softly, a note of warning in her voice. "The old binding weakens. The primordial shade stirs once more." Nell swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation settling in her chest. This was no longer a story of lost hikers or local superstition. The forest itself was alive with a dark, terrible force, one that had been waiting, watching, bound beneath the bark and stone, but not defeated. They spent hours in the clearing, documenting the carvings and discussing the ancient rites. Nell's journal filled with sketches and notes, each discovery deepening the labyrinth of mystery she was trapped within. As dusk crept over the horizon, the forest sounds shifted, the usual chorus of birds and insects giving way to an eerie silence broken only by the distant howl of a lone coyote. The shadows lengthened, and the air grew colder, as if the forest was breathing, alive and watching. Mabel gathered her belongings, her eyes scanning the darkness with a practiced wariness. "We must be cautious," she warned. "The primordial shade does not awaken lightly." Nell nodded, her mind racing with questions and fears. What had her brother uncovered? What had drawn him into this ancient darkness? And how could she hope to confront a force so old, so vast, that even the forest trembled beneath its weight? As they made their way back through the tangled woods, Nell's journal clutched tightly in her hands. The whispers of the pines seemed to follow, soft, persistent, and full of secrets yet to be revealed. The night would bring no rest. The forest's ancient heart was stirring, and with it, the shadows beneath the bark whispered promises of dread and revelation. Nell knew this was only the beginning. Her story and the forest's were forever entwined now, bound by secrets carved in stone and shadow, waiting to be unearthed. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, a suffocating silence pressing in as Nell and Deputy Marcus Flynn stepped cautiously into the clearing. The sun, which had only moments before cast a soft golden light through the canopy, now waned behind gathering clouds, and a chill crept through the air that neither of them could attribute to the falling temperature alone. The animals, usually rustling and calling out somewhere in the underbrush, had fallen eerily silent. Not even a bird dared to sing. Nell's pulse quickened, her fingers tightening around the journal she'd been clutching since dawn. "Do you feel it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the shifting shadows. "This ain't normal, Nell. Something's wrong here." His flashlight cut through the dim, illuminating patches of moss and twisted roots, but the deeper shadows seemed to swallow the beamhole. A sudden rustle to their left made them both spin around. A fox darted across a fallen log, its eyes reflecting an unnatural red glow before disappearing into the thicket. Nell swallowed hard, the hairs on her neck standing erect. "Did you see that?" she asked. "Yeah," Marcus replied, his voice low. "That's not right. Animals don't act like that unless they're scared, or worse." As they moved deeper into the clearing, the temperature dropped further, their breaths visible in the cold air. Nell's fingers traced the carvings on a nearby tree symbols she had seen before in Mabel. Cranes' tails twisting and strange, seeming to writhe under her touch. Suddenly, the shadows at the forest's edge thickened and shifted, coalescing into a shape both amorphous and terrifying. Two eyes, glowing like burning coals, pierced the gloom. The form writhed, stretching upward like smoke in a breeze, then pulsed like a heartbeat. Nell staggered back, heart pounding as the forest seemed to exhale a dark breath. Marcus raised his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness but failing to fully illuminate the shape. "Whatever that is," he muttered, "it ain't any animal I've seen." The coal-like eyes blinked once, then vanished as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving only the oppressive blackness and the echo of a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Nell steadied herself, forcing her racing thoughts into focus. This is the primordial shade," she whispered, the name tasting like smoke on her tongue. "It's not just a legend anymore. It's real." Marcus exhaled slowly, the skepticism that had clung to him beginning to crack under the weight of what they'd just witnessed. "So what do we do now?" Before Nell could answer, a sudden movement caught her. Archer tendril of shadow slithered along the ground, wrapping itself around the base of a tree, squeezing tight as if drawing life from it. The bark blackened and cracked, exuding a coldness that seeped into the soil. "It's feeding," Nell realized, voice trembling. feeding on the forest, on fear. Marcus looked around, his jaw clenched. We need to get this back to the others. They need to know what we're dealing with. As they turned to leave, the shadows seemed to pulse in protest, creeping closer, tendrils reaching out like grasping fingers. Nell felt a cold grip clutching at her chest, a whisper curling in her mind, words she couldn't quite make out, a promise of despair. Steeling herself, Nell pushed forward, her mind racing to piece together the warnings Mabel Crane had given, the ancient rituals whispered about in hushed tones. The primordial shade was awakening, and with it, a darkness older than the Pine Barrens itself. The forest seemed alive with menace now, every rustle a threat, every shadow a lurking horror. Nell and Marcus had crossed the threshold. They could no longer pretend this was folklore or superstition. The battle for the soul of the forest had begun. As they disappeared into the thickening gloom, the last thing Nell saw was the faint shimmer of those coal-black eyes watching, waiting, hungry for the fear that would feed the ancient evil once more. The primordial shade was stirring, and the echoes of its awakening would soon ripple through the very heart of the Pine Barrens. The night closed in around them, and the whispers in the pines grew louder still. The night settled over the Pine Barrens like a suffocating shroud, the dense canopy swallowing the last hues of twilight until the forest lay draped in near total darkness. Eleanor Nell Hayes sat by a small campfire, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows that leaped and writhed across the uneven ground. The air smelled of damp pine needles and earth, thick with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. She held in her hands a worn, yellowed page torn from her brother Tommy's journal. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the faded ink, the words swimming before her eyes, obsessive notes about the Jersey Devil, strange sounds in the woods, and an unyielding dread that seemed to have taken root in his mind. Nell's breath caught in her throat as a sudden gust of wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it 1,000 faint voices that seemed to call out in agony and warning. The shadows cast by the firelight stretched and twisted, taking on forms that her rational mind struggled to dismiss. She blinked hard, forcing herself to focus on the page, but the words felt heavier now, charged with an ominous weight she could no longer ignore. "Tommy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What did you find here?" The forest around her seemed to lean in closer, the stillness pressing on her chest like a physical force. Nell closed the journal, pressing it against her heart as if seeking solace from the fragile paper. Memories of her brother's laughter, his last excited calls from the woods, and the hollow silence after his disappearance flooded her mind. The guilt was a relentless tide, pulling her under with every thought. She had promised herself she would find the truth, but the truth was beginning to feel like a nightmare she might never escape. The crack of twigs nearby shattered the silence, and Nell snapped her head toward the sound, hand going to the knife strapped to her belt. Out of the darkness emerged Deputy Marcus Flynn, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight. His eyes, sharp and wary, flicked between Nell and the surrounding woods. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Marcus said gruffly, his voice carrying a mix of concern and reprimand. "I needed to be," Nell replied, her tone steady despite the turmoil inside. "I have to understand what Tommy was chasing." Marcus sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. "This forest, it's not just trees and shadows. There's something out there, something old and hungry. But chasing ghosts won't help anyone." "It's not ghosts," Nell said firmly. "It's something real, and I'm closer than ever." Their eyes locked, the tension between them palpable. Marcus was a man grounded in facts and law, and Nell was a woman drawn into the abyss of folklore and fear. Yet, beneath his skepticism lay a flicker of belief, born from years of witnessing the inexplicable. "I'll help you," Marcus finally said, his voice low. "But you have to promise me you'll be careful." Nell nodded, grateful for the reluctant alliance. It was a fragile bridge between two worlds, reason and myth, one she desperately needed to cross. The following day, Nell sought out Mabel Crane, the enigmatic herbalist whose piercing eyes seemed to hold the secrets of the forest itself. Mabel's small cabin was nestled among twisted pines, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and smoke. As Nell stepped inside, the dim light revealed shelves lined with jars of roots, powders, and strange talismans. Mabel looked up, her gaze sharp and knowing. "You carry the weight of loss," she said softly, "and the forest senses it. It feeds on fear and sorrow." Nell swallowed hard. "I need to know how to stop it." Mabel's eyes darkened. The primordial shade beneath these pines is ancient, bound by rites long forgotten. But those bindings weaken with every step humans take deeper into the woods. You must be careful. To fight it is to invite madness. "I'm already on that path," Nell admitted, the confession bitter on her tongue. Mabel approached, placing a gnarled hand on Nell's shoulder. "Remember, child, fear is a door. Walk through it with courage, or it will consume you." As Nell left the cabin, the shadows seemed to shift around her, the forest breathing with a life both beautiful and terrible. The burden of her mission pressed heavier, but so did a growing resolve. That evening, Nell found herself wandering the forest at twilight, the fading light casting long, distorted shadows between the ancient trees. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Her footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of needles, each sound magnified in the stillness. Her mind raced with memories of Tommy, Mabel's warnings, and Marcus's reluctant support. Doubt gnawed at her. Was she chasing a myth? Or was the darkness truly real, reaching out to claim her as it had claimed others? Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faintest whisper of voices, half-remembered lullabies, urgent warnings, and a low, guttural growl that made her blood run cold. Nell's heart pounded in her chest as the shadows around her deepened, coalescing into shapes that defied logic. Her breath caught, and a primal fear surged through her veins. Yet, amid the terror, a stubborn flame of determination burned brighter. She would face this darkness, no matter the cost. Back at camp, Nell jotted down her thoughts in her journal, the words a lifeline in the encroaching night. "Fear is the forest's weapon," she wrote, "but it's also my key. To walk through the shadows, I must first face the darkness inside." As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the whispers of the Pine Barrens faded into silence, leaving Nell poised at the crossroads of fear and hope, ready to confront whatever horrors awaited her in the depths of the ancient woods. The night had changed her, and the forest was watching still, waiting for the next move in a game as old as the pines themselves. And Nell knew the next step would be the hardest yet. The night had settled over the Pine Barrens like a suffocating blanket, swallowing the small town in its dense, impenetrable darkness. Eleanor Nell Hayes moved cautiously through the thick underbrush, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, the faint rustle of leaves underfoot merging with the distant symphony of nighttime insects. Her breath came in shallow bursts, a mix of nerves and the cold air that bit at her skin. She was not alone. Ahead, a faint glow flickered, the telltale sign of a fire. The meeting place. She emerged into a small clearing ringed by towering pines, their skeletal branches reaching like dark fingers into the night sky. Around the fire, a gathering of faces, some familiar, others strangers, flickered in the firelight. their expressions a mixture of fear, suspicion, and resolve. Nell recognized Deputy Marcus Flynn, his stocky frame leaning against a tree with arms crossed, eyes sharp and scanning. Beside him stood Mabel Crane, her long silver hair catching the firelight, her piercing eyes reflecting something ancient and knowing. Jonas Red, the woodsman, sat on a log, his rugged features shadowed but alert. Sheriff Linda Carraway lingered near the edge, her stance authoritative but tense. "Quiet down," Nell called softly as she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We're here because something's wrong. People are disappearing. The forest isn't what it used to be. We can't just sit and wait for it to get worse." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads. An older man, his weathered face etched with years of skepticism, spat, "Ghost stories and nonsense. It's the forest, it's wild. People get lost." "That's all. It's more than that," Nell replied firmly. "I've seen the signs. The shadows moving on their own. The symbols carved into the trees. This isn't just superstition. There's something dark waking beneath the pines." Mabel stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of decades. The old pact was meant to keep it bound. But the bindings weaken. Fear feeds it. Division makes it stronger. Marcus shifted uneasily. "We've dealt with missing persons before, but this is different. I don't know what to believe anymore. But if it's true, we need to act carefully." The crowd divided visibly. Some looked to Nell and Mabel with cautious hope, others with growing suspicion. The sheriff's eyes bore into Nell, the unspoken challenge clear. "Can you really lead this fractured town against a legend?" Voices rose, heated debates breaking out, some arguing for confronting the darkness head-on, others pleading to ignore it, fearing panic and chaos. Nell's heart pounded as she navigated the shifting tides of opinion, realizing that the biggest fight might be to unite the people before they could face the forest's true horror. As the fire sputtered and the night deepened, Nell found herself forging fragile alliances with those willing to listen, while others turned away, their mistrust a cold wedge in the community's fragile unity. The primordial shade's influence was not just in the shadows of the trees, but in the fractures between human hearts. When the meeting finally dispersed, Nell lingered by the dying embers, the weight of the night pressing down on her. She knew the battle ahead would not only be against an ancient evil, but against the very fears and secrets that held her town captive. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said quietly as he approached. "The forest is watching, and it's waiting for us to make the first move." Nell nodded, steeling herself. The midnight gathering had revealed the fractures, but also the faintest flicker of hope. If they were to stand a chance, they would need to hold onto that flicker and prepare for the darkness to come. The forest whispered around them, ancient and endless, as the night stretched on, endless and full of dread. The clearing was silent now, save for the crackling of the dying fire and the distant calls of night creatures. Nell pulled her jacket tighter around her, the chill seeping into her bones. Her journal rested in her hands, notes and sketches of the night's revelations. Each word was a step deeper into the mystery, but also a step closer to the edge of something terrifyingly real. She paused, listening. The wind stirred the trees, carrying with it a faint murmur, a whisper that seemed to echo from the heart of the forest itself. Nell shivered, the line between myth and reality blurring with every breath. What waited beneath the pines was awakening, and the midnight gathering was only the first move in a game older than time. The shadows lengthened, the whispers never ended, and Nell was ready to face them.